We're going to do a little training here this morning. A little bit different than the previous trainings that we've done is that we're actually videotaping this training. The hope being that moving forward, when we have new service coordinators that are hired at the regional center, we won't actually have to have a training be conducted, but that we'll actually be able to show them a video of it. And so with that in mind, I'd ask that you not discuss specific clients, not talk about client names. This might be something that ends up on a website, something that goes out to other regional centers to use for their staff as well. And so you're obviously welcome to talk about issues with clients. However, if we could not provide identifying information, it would be much appreciated. Okay? So I am John Decker. I'm the supervisor of the Community Placement Plan Forensics Unit. I'm the project manager for our MHSA grant. And this is John DeMiranda, who will introduce himself and what we're going to be doing today.
Okay, good morning. How is everybody this morning? Okay, I was up at 5:30 driving up here this morning, so hopefully you didn't have to come as far as I did to get here. Okay, a little bit about my background. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've worked in the alcohol and drug field for a long time. And a long time ago, got kind of interested in the fact that people with disabilities were not served well by the alcohol and drug service system. So I and some other activists started an organization called the National Association on Alcohol, Drugs, and Disability, and have for a number of years been kind of plugging away at that issue. And I'm very excited to be involved in the project that John's going to talk about here in Sacramento, because it really is kind of a first. A few years back, we started a project in San Diego with the regional center there that really looked at the problem of connecting both the alcohol and drug service system and the developmental service system. We did a lot of planning, we did a lot of kind of investigating, but had to stop at the point where we wanted to develop new services because the funding wasn't there. We were funded by a grant, and the grant ran out, and you know that story. But the Mental Health Services Act money created an opportunity here that John's going to talk about to really take all that we've learned and operationalize it into a series of services and a continuum of services that is what this project is all about. So let me turn it over to John to talk about the project, and then I'll give you a preview of what the morning will look like.
So as I mentioned, this is a MHSA grant. It is a 3-year grant. We're actually in the last year of the grant right now. And it was kind of a multifaceted grant, and I'm going to explain a little bit about why a Mental Health Services Act grant has been offered for drug and alcohol training. One of the things that we found at Alta, California Regional Center is that we had many adult clients that would try to access our mental health services, and there was a huge barrier for them to be able to access those services. And can anyone guess what that barrier was?
Their disability.
Their disability, definitely. That was one of the barriers. But the big barrier that we saw was their ongoing substance abuse issues. They were not able to access those mental health services. And so a grant was written by Olivia Balco over 3 years ago to tap some Mental Health Services Act money. And so the grant itself has multiple areas, the biggest being to develop a connection between our service system and the alcohol and drug world. As a regional center, we only have one alcohol and drug vendor that's currently vendorized, and that's Pathways in Yuba City, where they have residential drug treatment for our clients. And not a lot of people have utilized that service, and we have had no real other connections with alcohol and drug providers. It is a generic resource. However, they don't really have much specialty in working with our folks either. And so the different parts of the grant are, first thing was to develop a joint task force. And so what we did is we got a group of service coordinators, supervisors, clinical staff, and then actual alcohol and drug providers from our area to come together and define how we were going to connect with the different service systems. And so what we did was we developed trainings. The first trainings that we did were for the actual alcohol and drug providers, the generic resources. John and I went out, we conducted a needs assessment, and we went and asked them, what kind of training do you need to be able to work with individuals with developmental disabilities? And so we took that information, we developed curriculum, and now we've done training to over 200 individuals throughout our 10-county catchment area. We've done it up in Tahoe, we've been out to Woodland, we've been all over the place. And then we've also now come to developing trainings for our service coordinators, because we recognize that not a lot of individuals that are our service coordinators have a lot of experience working with individuals with substance abuse issues. You work with them all the time, but you don't have any real special training, and we're hoping to give you some of that special training here. The last part of the training part of the grant is that we're going to be training vendors. Many of our vendors, ILS, SLS, residential, day programs, have clients with developmental disabilities and with substance abuse issues. So for the remainder of this year, after we finish up these trainings with service coordinators, we're going to be actually training our vendors. So you'll be seeing our vendors coming in here and getting training on working with our clients that have that dual diagnosis. Now, many of these people have triple diagnosis. They have mental health issues as well. And so we recognize that, but we're really focusing on the substance abuse issues here so that people can be properly served or more appropriately served. Another part of this grant was the development of specific services for our clients. We have had multiple agencies request vendorization with us. Now that we've gone out and done training with them, they've said, you know what, we want to offer specialized drug treatment for your clients. So the Bridges program in Sacramento, if any of you are Sacramento adult service coordinators, you might be familiar with Bridges, or the STARS program. They do case management for our adult clients that are involved in the dependency court and in the criminal court. They're seeking vendorization with us right now to provide specialized outpatient drug treatment, as is Strategies for Change, located in South Sacramento. And we also, the biggest one that we're doing right now is we're having a vendorization for a peer mentoring program, where we're going to be, in essence, doing kind of a day program type service where we are going to be paying our clients who have gone successfully through drug treatment to be mentors for our clients that have not yet gone through drug treatment yet. And so we're really excited about that program. Nothing like that has ever been done, and so we're looking forward to that. So those are all the different facets of the grant. This part right here, to me, is probably one of our most important, where you're going to get some tools, and John's going to go over it with you. You're going to get some tools on how to work with your clients. And I think this touches everyone, because if it's not, if you have an adult caseload, your clients, and if you have a children's caseload, many of the parents have substance abuse issues. And I know that I've been in multiple committees where what's this X factor? Why aren't people being successful in services? And we find out that there's actually substance abuse issues that are going on that are preventing people from successfully accessing these services. So no one is expected to leave this training as experts on how to deal with all of this, but this is some tools that you guys can have in working with these clients, okay?
Okay. So what are we going to do this morning? You've already had a little bit of the overview of the project. We're going to talk about generic alcohol and drug problems and do a little kind of values clarification around this. My experience is that people have all kinds of misinformation, bring a lot of biases, a lot of personal stuff to discussions about alcohol and drug problems, and it often interferes with their ability to kind of work with clients. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about a screening tool you can use to ask some simple questions to try and see if there's perhaps more, where there's smoke, there's fire, more need for services after you've gone through the screening. We're going to talk a little bit about terminology. We have our terminology issues just like every field has, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page with that. Then we're going to watch a short video, No Ordinary Pain. It was filmed in New York City at a place called the Association Helping Retarded Citizens. And because that is such a large agency in such a large city, they tend to have a lot of pretty unique services, and they actually have an outpatient alcohol and drug counseling service for people with developmental disabilities there. And you're going to see a number of first-person accounts of people talking about their recovery, people with developmental disabilities. Then we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to break into small groups for the kind of the last half hour. And in small groups, ask you to take on and discuss two case scenarios, two hypotheticals of clients or clients like the clients you might have, and how you would strategize what to do with these clients in small groups. We'll come back after the small group exercise, debrief the exercise a little bit, then you have an evaluation to fill out, and we should be finished by 11:30. Okay, everybody on the same page? Okay, so you all have the kind of the resource guide. At the very back of it is a glossary of terms. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of these terms. Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous are often referred to as self-help groups, but in the alcohol and drug field, we're kind of trying to change that to mutual assistance or mutual help groups, because the concept self-help is really not consistent with what goes on in a 12-step meeting. It is really peers helping peers, kind of mutually, and we're trying to get away from the public understanding or the public misconception that there is a bootstraps kind of mentality around alcohol and drug problems, and that people ought to be able to, get their act together without assistance. Addiction, we have been kind of moving away from talking about stigmatizing labels like drug addict, alcoholic, and more in the alcohol and drug field, you'll hear person-first terminology, which we've learned from the disability community. So people with substance use disorder would be kind of the standard preferred term as opposed to drug addict. And similarly, we are using lately the concept of long-term recovery as a kind of a way of identifying people. So when I speak in public, when I introduce myself to people, I'm less likely to say today, I'm a recovering alcoholic or a recovered alcoholic. I'm more likely to say I'm a person in long-term recovery, because it's really a much more positive, kind of hopeful term than this stigmatizing term alcoholic. And you also have to kind of be careful with some of the organizations in our field. For example, there's an organization called Narcanon, which a lot of people think, well, that sounds like Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon. It's actually an organization that provides addiction treatment, but it's a part of the Church of Scientology. And a lot of people don't realize that there are, buyer beware and kind of warning signs that maybe you want to look a little bit deeper to anybody that's offering help. Okay, we also use the acronym AOD, stands for alcohol and other drugs. Sometimes people say, well, why the other drugs? And this goes back to a time maybe 15, 20 years ago when we were trying to counter the influence of the alcoholic beverage industry and the advertising that is so pervasive that tends to present alcohol as a wonderful adjunct to a great life, okay? So we started using alcohol and other drugs to make sure people understood that alcohol was a drug and that there was a downside and a negative side to what Anheuser-Busch portrayed in its 30-second ads. And sometimes you'll hear AODA for alcohol and other drug abuse. Codependence is a term that's thrown around a lot in the alcohol and drug field and outside the alcohol and drug field. It often has a kind of a punchline mentality to it. There is very little evidence in the scientific literature for codependency, and it's been kind of kept out of the DSM-5 and the DSM-4, but it's used a lot, and it basically refers to people who receive a lot of value, a lot of identity and value themselves from helping others. And while there's nothing wrong with that to a certain degree, sometimes when it goes too far and the person is really focused exclusively or heavily on the other, they can tend to lose track of themselves and run into problems. And if we had more time and we're doing a more extensive training, we would talk some about how, in many ways, working with persons with substance use disorder and working with persons that have developmental disabilities is similar in that you can give and give and give of yourself. There's almost a never-ending need to provide services, to provide supports, and unless people who work or are in families or are connected in some way to either of those kinds of individuals, burnout and the kind of the negative downside of codependency can surface. Denial, that's kind of another old standby in the alcohol and drug field. We talk a lot about denial. And one of the myths about addictions is that, or was that, you had to wait for somebody to hit bottom. There was a limit to what you could do. You had to maybe be confrontive and break through people's denial. These were all part of kind of old school alcohol and drug thinking, intervention and treatment. And we've gone through a major sea change in the past maybe 10, 15 years, and have really incorporated something called motivational interviewing. Sometimes it's called motivational enhancement training. Sometimes it's called stages of change. And basically that helps us to meet clients or meet individuals where they are rather than where we'd like them to be, i.e. maybe abstinent and in recovery. So that you look at somebody from a point of view of they're in pre-contemplation. They haven't even thought about making any changes in their life. And the goal of the counselor is to help them kind of move beyond pre-contemplation to contemplation, the next stage, which is beginning to think that maybe there's an alcohol or drug problem in their life, and maybe they need to do something about it. And what I would suggest to you is that, we're not here to train you to be alcohol and drug counselors, but part of what you do every day with clients that you serve is help them connect the dots, help them see the forest for the trees, help them make connections that maybe are not evident to them. And it's kind of the same thing with an alcohol or drug problem. If you have a trusting relationship with someone, they will reveal to you the difficulties that they're having in their life, okay? And if you are non-judgmental and you're a good active listener, you may receive from a client several bits of information about their alcohol and drug use that cause you to wonder and to think that maybe they're experiencing some difficulty. And we're going to get into one of the instruments you can use to help you to do that. If you then help feed back to them how those things may be connected to their alcohol and drug use in a way that they can maybe understand and agree to, that's really half the battle. Helping somebody to see that the fact that every time they've had this difficulty in their life, whether it was an argument with somebody or an interaction with the criminal justice system or some fear of loss of benefits, that drinking or maybe drug use was part of it. If you can help them to see that when they haven't seen it, then you've done them a great service. And so denial is another one. Detoxification is simply the process of helping somebody or assisting somebody as they're going through the process of freeing the particular drug of choice from their body. Disease model, it's an article of faith in the alcohol and drug field. We use the term a lot, that it's a disease. The AMA calls it a disease. But there's still an awful lot of people, myself included, who kind of have mixed feelings about that, because there is a learned behavior component to alcohol and drug problems. And I tend to see it as some of both, that there is a disease process, there are certainly changes in the brain that occur after chronic long-term use, but also there is a volitional component or a behavioral component and a learned behavior component. Enabling. Enabling is a term that in your field usually has a positive connotation. Somebody who enables somebody is facilitating them, is helping them, is assisting them. In our field, enabling tends to be a dirty word. An enabler is somebody who allows somebody's drug use to continue by enabling them. So again, careful about how terms are being used. Fetal alcohol syndrome, fetal drug syndrome, fetal alcohol FASD, there's lots of different terms for it, but this is the one place where our field really intersects with your field. And in our prevention messages, especially to young women or women of childbearing age, the fact that fetal alcohol syndrome is 100% preventable, through non-use of alcohol is a big part of our prevention messages to young women. Harm reduction used to be many years ago in our field, that was a problematic term. People tended to not want to use it. It tended to get very politicized and be associated with drug legalization. But it really is a strong, positive strategy, helping somebody reduce the harm associated with their drug use. So that if you're a cigarette smoker who uses filter cigarettes, you're practicing harm reduction. When you get in your car and put your seatbelt on, you're practicing harm reduction. These are public health strategies, and it's the same thing in the alcohol and drug field. If you can help somebody who's regularly using heroin or methamphetamine to tamp down their use so that they're drinking or using marijuana, less dangerous drugs, you're participating in a harm reduction strategy for them. Because if they're not using dirty needles, they're also not exposing themselves to STDs, HIV, etc. Medication-assisted treatment becoming more and more acceptable. We're talking about methadone and more recently Suboxone. And then recovery. As I mentioned, we're using the term recovery a lot to give a more positive kind of spin to the recovery enterprise. So any questions about any of the terminology before we, does anybody have a term that they're not sure they know the meaning of that they'd like to throw out here? Okay. All right, on page 6.
We missed a few terms.
Oh, in the back. Oh, sorry. They are relapse. Relapse is, for many people, a part of the alcohol and drug problem. Very few people will go into long-term recovery on their first effort to, either the first effort in treatment or their first effort at total abstinence and sobriety. Relapse is often expected, and we now incorporate into most treatment programs relapse prevention strategies so that people can identify where are the triggers in their life, where are the opportunities or the experiences in their life that might trigger a relapse as a way of kind of protecting people and providing them some protective strategies for when they're out in the real world. Screening. The CRAFT that we're going to get to in a few minutes, the brief intervention tool, is really to try and screen, not assess, but screen for people who may be having an alcohol or drug problem. The assessment comes later. That's done by a certified alcohol and drug counselor, and we're not asking you to assess, but we are asking you to develop some strategies and some abilities to screen for possible alcohol and drug problems. Sponsor. In a 12-step mutual aid group, often people will have a sponsor, and in fact it's a really good way to connect clients from the regional center with 12-step programs. If sponsors can be identified that are willing to work with your clients, that's a way of making sure that when somebody attends a 12-step meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, that they're going to be introduced to other people, they're going to have this kind of unusual environment explained to them in a way that's going to help them to feel comfortable and maybe come back. And in fact, one of the things that we've seen over and over again for successful persons with developmental disabilities who get involved in the 12-step community is what happens is that the 12-step community becomes the friends and the supports that they were looking for in the bars and the parks and around alcohol and drug use. Okay? And that fellowship is available almost 24/7. People who get involved in Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, there are meetings often kind of around the clock. There are lots of good weekend meetings if the weekend is a time of susceptibility for someone. If they have a sponsor, usually the sponsor is available by phone, pretty regularly. So sponsorship and 12-step involvement can be important parts of success. Tolerance refers to the fact that when people are using drugs or alcohol on a regular basis, they often need more to make the same level of comfort or to reduce the discomfort that comes with alcohol and drug use withdrawal. Treatment is professional assistance in the kinds of programs that John mentioned, Bridges and programs like, I can't think of others, but the National Council on Alcohol and Drug Dependence, not to be confused with mutual aid organizations. Okay, look at page 6 and take the next few minutes answering the questions on the alcohol and drug quiz for developmental disability professionals, and we'll use this as an opportunity to discuss some things in a little bit more in depth.
Page 7.
Page 7, yeah, I'm using the old one. Okay. And don't look at the following page, which has the answers. That's for later when you forget the answer and need to be refreshed. Okay, let's talk about these for a few minutes. The first question, the 12-step approach of Alcoholics and Narcotics Anonymous is the most effective treatment for alcohol and or drug problems? The correct answer is really false, because it's not treatment, for one thing. Okay? We just talked about that. It's mutual assistance or it's support. And while some people believe it is a very effective approach, and it is a very effective approach, there is no one modality. We're very clear now in the addictions field that there is no one modality that is superior to others. Almost all of the evidence-based approaches, including the treatment version of 12-step programs, which is called 12-step facilitation treatment. Have I confused you now by saying it wasn't treatment and now I'm saying it is treatment? Well, that's the case. I mean, AA and NA are out there in the community, they're mutual aid, they're kind of this underground conspiracy, but so much treatment over the years has been developed around AA and the 12 steps that we actually have a treatment modality called 12-step facilitation. And it is an evidence-based treatment modality. And when compared with other modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy, like therapeutic communities, like motivational enhancement treatment, they're all seen to be about equal in terms of their effectiveness. Now, where AA and NA really are superior is in terms of numbers. And there's a lot of people involved in AA and NA. So to say it is the most maybe popular form of mutual aid, it would be accurate, but it is not treatment, and it is not, the most effective. Okay, number 2, unaddressed alcohol and other drug abuse can place a person with developmental disabilities at higher risk for all of those things. And in fact, in talking to your clients about alcohol and drug problems, or their alcohol and drug use, my recommendation is really to focus on the jeopardy to independent living, the jeopardy to independence, and the safety issues associated with alcohol and drug use. People kind of, in general, almost always default to well, it's bad, or it's good. This kind of morality argument around alcohol and drug problems. And you want to try and stay away from that, because that's really a values judgment, and it's what really is not effective with people. But to talk about self-interest, and assuming that most of your clients are interested in maximizing their independence and their independent functioning, and helping them connect the dots between how alcohol use or their drug use can undermine or limit their independence is where you're going to get some resonance and you're going to hit pay dirt with those individuals. And safety. If they're taking medications, for example, especially some of the psychoactive medications, pointing out the side effects or the synergies between the medications they're taking for prescription purposes and how alcohol and drugs might interact with them from a safety perspective is going to make sense. So number 3, wine and beer use.
Real quickly, I wanted to touch on the loss of regional center benefits. You guys probably saw that answer on there. Does anyone understand why that's on there? Adult service coordinators ever have clients that just fall off the face of the earth? And if you're familiar with my unit, the forensics unit, we have many individuals that have substance abuse issues that we're dealing with. And so it's not that because someone's an alcohol and drug user that they lose their regional center services. It's that very quickly the lifestyle that they fall into leads them to be someone that we can't remain in contact with. And they fall off the face of the earth, in essence, until they get arrested again, or they're in jail, and then all of a sudden someone identifies that they were a regional center client, and then we get the call that they're coming back through intake again. So that's where we're touching on when it talks about losing your regional center benefits. It's not that we would cut someone off because they have substance abuse issues or in treatment, but rather because of that substance abuse, their lifestyle leads them to become not available for services, basically, or incarcerated.
Yeah, and in some ways, you're kind of the exception. There are lots of ways that people can lose by using alcohol and drugs. They can lose their job, they can lose family members, and so, maybe not threatening with loss from the regional center, but there are other ways that people can be motivated for fear of losing some of that independence or some of the benefits they're getting from other sources. Okay, any questions about anything so far? I know we're going fast, we have a lot to cover. and to do it in this period of time, we need to move pretty quickly. So number 3, wine and beer use are less likely to lead to problems than drinking distilled spirits or hard liquor. Anybody think that's true? It's false, but it is also part of popular culture that there is kind of a difference between the two substances. In fact, a number of years ago, the federal government had a big education campaign called the Equivalency Campaign. You may remember it. It would show a 5-ounce glass of wine, a 12-ounce can of beer, and a 1.5-ounce shot of distilled spirits with equal signs, because the amount of alcohol in each of those drinks was approximately half an ounce of alcohol. So they were essentially equivalent. But the other thing is, in reality, in our culture, you can get away with drinking beer or wine in certain social settings where it might be more difficult to do that with distilled spirits. So think, for example, it's a nice sunny summer day here in Sacramento, and it's a Saturday, and men are out there mowing the lawn, right? Well, after you mow the lawn, you pop a can of beer and you drink it. Nobody's going to really look twice at that. But imagine instead, after they finished mowing the lawn, they walked over, got a bottle of Jack Daniels, poured 1.5 ounces, and took a shot, okay? People would look very differently at that behavior, but in fact, it's the same thing. It's drinking, whether it's beer, wine, or hard liquor. Okay, so I hope it haven't any pull back the curtain on anybody's behavior, but there are none of you that have some beer or wine upstairs that you occasionally pull out. Okay. Or maybe there is. Would anybody like to talk about that? We can do a little intervention right now. Number 4, speaking of intervention, a person with a substance use problem, and substance use is the terminology we're using today. We're really trying to get away from the concept of substance abuse, although it's ubiquitous. Substance abuse tends to get people thinking about child abuse and domestic abuse, and so we use substance use disorder. So a person with a substance use problem can receive an intervention and other helpful forms of assistance before getting bumped. And yes, in fact, that's true. How many of you have seen the television program Intervention? Okay, very entertaining, very dramatic, not particularly accurate from our point of view in the alcohol and drug field. And it represents what we call the classic revolutionary intervention, where you work with the family and the significant others, and then you have this big confrontation with the individual who's the problem user, with a confrontation that says you must go into treatment, or we're going to divorce you, or leave you out in the cold, etc. There is some value to that in some situations, but what I really try and help people understand is it's more the evolutionary interventions that have power. And let me just draw from my own lived experience. I'm a person in long-term recovery. My drug of choice was essentially alcohol. And in my first marriage, it was only when my wife, who having gotten involved with Al-Anon, and does everybody know what Al-Anon is? It's the self-help, it's the mutual aid support groups for people who are involved with alcoholics and drug addicts. Okay, so it's the spouses, the family members, the friends. Okay, it was when she got involved in Al-Anon and began to understand her role in enabling my alcohol use, and began to set limits and set boundaries around what was acceptable to her and what wasn't. That's when things began to change for me, and she began to get healthier. Okay, and I can still remember I had been bouncing in and out of psychiatric facilities, in and out of addiction treatment for a couple of years. My drinking period basically ran from 16 to about 26. And I can remember with a certain amount of clarity when my wife said to me one day, I'm not going to buy beer for you ever again. I've stopped going to Safeway and putting it in the shopping cart when I come home. I'm just not going to do that. I'm not comfortable doing that. She said it in a loving way. It is not something that came easy to her. She had to kind of work up to it, she told me later. But her doing that and other things like that really helped to facilitate my seeing the forest for the trees. My seeing that, my drinking was a problem for her. I couldn't kind of lay it off on her because she was doing this in a kind and loving way. She wasn't doing it in an angry way, which would allow me to kind of dismiss it. So it's that kind of intervention that can really be, I think, very powerful, as well as the more confrontive intervention, the revolutionary intervention. Okay, number 5, persons with developmental disabilities who drink alcohol in combination with psychoactive medications may experience a heightened effect after only 1 or 2 drinks. And this is the part of the problem, that persons with developmental disabilities, even with relatively low amounts, because of the effect of the drug or alcohol on judgment, on inhibition, and on cognitive functioning, can have more serious consequences at lower levels than persons from the general population. Another way to help people kind of connect the dots. Number 6, a blackout occurs when a person drinks alcohol and then has no recollection about a period of time. True? True. It's essentially temporary amnesia, and usually occurs in more advanced cases of alcohol abuse. So if you have a friend, who's joking about the fact that, the other night they were drinking and they lost track of, they don't remember what happened, that's a pretty big warning sign. And, reflecting back to them that is what's called a blackout, and introducing some reality around that rather than, the joke of, gee, I don't remember what happened, is a way of helping them see the forest for the trees, connect the dots. Number 7, fumes from which of the following can be inhaled to produce a high? And it's really all of the above. Spray paint, bottle glue, nail polish remover, whipped cream. The propellant in whipped cream canisters is what gets young people high. And inhalant abuse, because it is ubiquitous, it's pretty easy to get these products and not very expensive. It's one of the reasons why young people, very young people, are really at risk for inhalant abuse. And it's really serious. The action of the inhaled glue or whatever the substance is on the brain is really pretty toxic. Number 8, we've already talked about alcohol-related birth defects are 100% preventable. We talked at number 9 about motivational interviewing as a way of helping somebody to kind of raise their bottom. It's also called stages of change. And then reducing or eliminating alcohol and drug use increases independent living potential. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, so everybody got 100 on the quiz? All right. And if you want to use it with your colleagues or your family or friends, the answers are on the back. So you can say you're now the expert. Okay, questions or anything before we move on to the next piece? How many people have a client currently, or have recently had a client, where they suspected or believed that there was an alcohol problem? Okay. Anything about any of those clients that you're willing to share in light of what we're talking about this morning? Yeah.
My client was incarcerated and came out of jail and into treatment, but nothing seemed to help him. None of the supports that we put in place, and he eventually violated probation and is back in jail.
Exactly, yeah. And he probably won't get much help there.
It's actually in a treatment, well, they put him in a treatment facility.
Oh.
After jail, they stuck him in rehab.
How long was he there?
He's still in rehab.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, so he was ordered to rehab by the court. Okay.
Yes.
And that's, that's the fact for a lot of people. A lot of people are coerced into treatment. And the job of treatment, and maybe your job in some situations, is really to help them go from having this external force pushing them to stop using or to, to begin to lead a clean and sober life, to incorporating some of that internally so that it's their reason for wanting to do that. This is what goes on in treatment. I ran a treatment program in San Diego for a number of years called Stepping Stone. This is our little logo here. And you would see this in 98% of the cases. People who didn't want to be there, They'd come in under some kind of coercion, whether it was the court or a spouse or maybe family members or parents. And the job of treatment is really to kind of bring the external force and help the person internalize it so they're not using because they don't want to anymore. They've had the experience perhaps after being in treatment for a few months of feeling physically alcohol and drug free, which can be a, kind of a revelation for a lot of folks that they're feeling so much better than they were, surrounded by other people in recovery and hearing about the positive side of not using and engaging in mutual aid organizations like NA and AA, all of which can help them internalize the motivation for continuing to not use. And that's really what treatment's about. Okay, so we're going to now watch this 26-minute video called No Ordinary Pain. And the way we do that is by pressing a button somewhere. Those New Yorkers, they talk funny, don't they? Reactions? Anything look familiar there? Well, work with me, folks. Work with me. What about the video? Did you find interesting, useful, whatever? Yeah.
One thing that really caught my attention was towards the end there, one of the guys said you need to look at all their problems, and I think that's difficult. I find it difficult. There's everything has its box. There's you have your developmental disability, or you have your mental health, or you have your other issues that you're dealing with, and I find it hard. Or with work, you're working with the Department of Rehabilitation. Everything seems to be in a box, and even more so in the past few years, it seems like it becomes really difficult to try and help the whole person.
Yeah, when we work in silos, everything's compartmentalized. Somebody once said to me, we do it exactly backwards. When somebody comes in for services, we're supposed to assess them for what they need. We're supposed to know at that point what all their problems are, so we can, that should occur at the end, after you've had the interactions with somebody for a long period of time. Then you really understand them. But we have this demand that we do this up front. Another one of the, I think, messages coming out of this is the African-American man, Batson. His statement, unaddressed alcohol and drug problems undermine all outcomes. I think that is a really strong message and a strong mantra for what we're talking about here. Unaddressed alcohol and drug problems undermine all outcomes. Other reactions? Okay. Then what I want to do is, before we get into small groups, just touch on a couple of things. Let's see. Some of the risk factors. I mean, there's not a lot of research on people with developmental disabilities and alcohol and drug problems. And in fact, if you really get interested in this issue and begin to kind of dig into it and educate yourself and provide some expertise to this agency or agencies in the future that you might work for, you will become one of a very small number of people who have expertise in this issue. But we know a few things about these clients. One is that they learn their drug and alcohol use at their families of origin, often because these families are somewhat disorganized and chaotic. Status transitions are very difficult, and this isn't just true for persons with developmental disabilities, but think of young people. When they graduate from high school and they're going through that transition, or they're getting into the workforce, or they're in college, or in fraternities. It's those kinds of transitions where they have the most vulnerability and have the most, anxiety and stress, and therefore turn to alcohol and drugs, just like people in the general population often do when things are difficult. Another risk factor is the whole concept of medications. It is, to me, one of the real kind of warning signs and red lights that should be blinking in terms of your clients. And if you have clients that are on heavy-duty psychoactive medications and they're using alcohol inappropriately or using illicit drugs, you've got a problem. And you really want to develop a strategy for talking with them and hopefully reducing the harm associated with the synergy between those two substances. Influence of friends. You saw it in the video, and we see this over and over again, that persons with developmental disabilities have real challenges creating affiliations and friendships. And it's probably the thing that most of them want and have difficulty getting. And alcohol can be the bridge to friendship. I mean, if they've got an SSI check coming in and they've got a little money to take down into the park or take to the bar, they're going to get some instant friends. And there have been a number of situations that I don't have time to get into in detail where that kind of relationship evolves or devolves into a really predatory relationship between people using alcohol and drugs in parks and back alleys and the kind of clients that you see being taken advantage of in very serious ways. Often young women for sexual favors, men sometimes for sexual favors. And then a 12-step community can become the friends that they're looking for, but it takes some real effort to connect them with the 12-step community. These three risk factors speak to the fact that most of the young people who are living in our communities and going to middle school, elementary school, and high school get exposed to a fair amount of drug prevention education. Okay, there's the DARE program for what it's worth in elementary school, but later on in middle and high school, more serious drug education and exposure to prevention strategies and how to, just say no, it's still around, and how to resist peers who are trying to get somebody to use alcohol and drugs. None of that is experienced by most clients in the regional center because they're not going through traditional schools. They're not, maybe not even in special education. So they don't have anything to mediate the advertising influence of the alcohol beverage industry. All right, when they're looking at a billboard or watching television or going to a feature film, most of what they're going to see is alcohol and drugs going to make your life wonderful. It's going to get you friends, it's going to get you success, it's going to get you boyfriends, girlfriends. They don't have that, kind of prevention education stuff to kind of balance that, and that's a risk factor. So those are some of the risk factors. Any questions about that? We're going to get into small groups. What I'd like to do is maybe get into groups of 5 each or so, 4 or 5 each, just kind of turn around. And then you have these 2 cases. I'd like you to spend maybe 10 minutes discussing each and answering the questions that come at the bottom of the page. Let me read it to you. Melanie is a 26-year-old woman who lives in a care home and works in a fast food restaurant with the assistance of a supported employment job coach. She experiences mild mental retardation that usually passes as someone without a disability. Melanie's relatively recent financial independence, she has been employed only for the past year, and her moderate attractiveness allow her to socialize with friends that often involves alcohol-fueled partying and late nights at local bars. Staff at the care home have become concerned that her good work ethic is deteriorating because she was called in sick twice recently after a late night out with friends. In order to maintain her position in the group home, staff there have referred her to you as her service coordinator for support and to assess her for an alcohol problem. Care home staff concern has been heightened by her admission that she recently had unprotected sex with someone she barely knew who had befriended her at a local night spot. So that's Melanie. Antonio is a 35-year-old Mexican-American male who resides with his mother and is a client at Alta, California Regional Center. As a child, Antonio received a traumatic brain injury in an auto crash that resulted in substantial information processing deficits. Antonio speaks with moderate impairment and often cannot understand communication beyond the sophistication level of the 4th grade. He spends his weekdays in a sheltered workshop, but on weekends is often unsupervised, as his mother and other family members are too busy to look after him. Recently, he has begun to spend time with a group of homeless friends at the local park who have adopted him into their circle because he often has money for cheap wine and is more than happy to share with those he refers to as his buddies. Yesterday, local police found Antonio asleep in the park early in the morning. They returned him to his mother's house with a warning and a referral to the local drug agency for counseling and an educational program about drugs and alcohol that is intended to deter individuals from further involvement in the criminal justice system. So as his service coordinator, you will liaison with the drug program. So for each of those scenarios, after you've kind of discussed them for a little bit, try and answer these questions. As you prepare for your next meeting with Melanie and then with Antonio, how will you build rapport with them to elicit information upon which to base an accurate screening for the nature and extent of their alcohol and or drug problem? What kind of collateral information would you like to get and from whom? And during this next session, how will you communicate information about the risks facing them, as well as assess their motivations for change? So maybe we can get into 3 groups of maybe 4 each, and spend the next 20 minutes or so, 10-15 minutes on each of the cases.
Okay, so Toby Chavez just started, yeah.
Makes you feel like you're in school.
So what did your groups decide was needed with, what's her name? Melanie. In fact, Melanie was patterned after a real client in San Diego. So what's your strategy? What's your plan?
You want to start back here?
We're kind of depressed, but undepressed. You know, but we try to elicit what the client's goals are, and what are their hopes and dreams, and where do they want to live, what they want to do, and try to tie their behavior with getting them closer or farther from their dreams. But we all said that unless we can find some motivation within them, we see them quarterly or more often as we have to increase our case management, but we didn't see our influence as being as strong as that of their friends in the park or their friends in the bar.
Mm-hmm.
So, we try to form that rapport and find out their goals and encourage them to move towards them instead of away from them.
Mm-hmm. So, one way to kind of maintain rapport and support, but also kind of move them, is through the motivational interviewing strategy known as creating discrepancy. Does that ring any bells with creating discrepancy? What happens when you're creating discrepancy is, you're listening to somebody talk about their aspirations, what they want. But you're also hearing when you ask questions about their alcohol and drug use, or about their lifestyle, or about how they're spending their time, and there's different ways to get into it. You hear that there's a big gap between what's happening in their life today and what they want. So creating discrepancy is helping them see that maybe the alcohol or drug use or their lifestyle or their behavior is, impeding in some way their vision. And that is how, in motivational interviewing, you move somebody from pre-contemplation, where they don't have a clue, to contemplation, where they're beginning to, maybe make that connection. And then over time, this kind of implies a counseling relationship, not a quarterly check-in relationship. But I think there's, maybe there's still some things that could be done in terms of the screening and then referral for more intense work to one of the programs we've been talking about. And we'll talk about the screening instrument in a few minutes. What about the other groups? Mark, did you want to add anything?
Just Alta? No, okay.
Other groups? You're on camera, so
Someone's got to grab a microphone.
Check. You know, I think it seems like it's hard to not look through the window that is Alta in addressing these problems. It seemed like we tended to at least initially look at, okay, what service can you throw at it that might make a difference, which was more true in Antonio's case, I think, than Melanie. You'd have to try to work with the residential service provider to figure out how this is happening. Should it be something that you should be addressing it at a teen level, probably. As a male, it would be more difficult for me to address some of this stuff, and the lack of birth control and all, and I would maybe enlist female staff at the home or possibly family member or something to try to help.
well, there's kind of an immediate risk here, and that is the unprotected sex and HIV transmission or STD transmission. But you'd also have a strategy coming online. You have an alcohol and drug service that will soon be available to people like Melanie, she could be referred to for, exploring her alcohol and drug use, exploring her lifestyle with that kind of ongoing motivational interviewing strategy. Maybe over time she can begin to see that, what she wants is not what she's going to get if she continues on her current course.
I know Lindsay's in residential. Do you run into anything similar to this with any of your residential clients? If I'm familiar with your caseload, I think you might have.
Well, there is some similarities in one particular consumer I work with. One of the things that I would do was talk to the care provider, talk to the job coach, see what other resources they currently are receiving from the regional center. Like my particular person has Turning Point. So I totally go to Turning Point and talk to them and see what kind of classes they could help her and offer her, figure out why she's doing it.
Can you just explain real quickly what Turning Point is? For those that don't use
Mental
it?
health services, right? And they have ongoing check-in phone calls or face-to-face appointments with them, and they have goals in regards to behaviors or addictions, like inappropriate behaviors like seeking. I don't know. I don't want to get too specific.
Yeah.
But and so, or figure out the family involvement and stuff like that, and seeing if there's a history of it, with reviewing her charge, seeing if this has happened in the past and what other service coordinators have done to help her, and really figure out, like they said over there, what her goals are and how to get her to realize that this is impairing her goals. And
For those of you that do use Turning Point wraparound services, Turning Point is actually one of our members of our joint task force, and so they've been integral in participating in these meetings with us as we develop this curriculum. And obviously, with all of the mental health work that they do, there's a ton of crossover between substance abuse issues as well, and they're actually looking at doing substance abuse groups with us too. So, but you're right, being able to look at the services that are currently in place, would be beneficial, and how they can be activated.
In this day and age, most mental health programs have some considerable expertise with alcohol and drugs. And most alcohol and drug programs have some considerable expertise with mental health issues. But don't assume that's always the case, because historically it hasn't been. So don't just, because it's a mental health agency, think that they're going to be able to do good by your client who's having a drinking problem.
Front group? Who's going to reach out for it?
We thought best, obviously, a conversation with the care home and the job coach. I think the job coach might be really critical here since they work with that person pretty closely. What have we been seeing in her productivity? Has it declined? Is it still okay? That job coach, kind of teaming up with the job coach to discuss these issues with the client, not preaching to her, but talking about the downsides, especially with the unprotected sex and the
departing and the absences. You know, sometimes our clients don't know how serious what they do is unless somebody really lays it on the line for them. So we thought those conversations. Also, what kind of relationship does she have with her family? If you know her family or if you're familiar, you may want to bring that to their attention if they don't already know, so that they can reach out to help too. So I think just contacting several people to discuss it, especially the ones she works close to, and if enough people are talking to her about it, maybe it sinks in that it's kind of a big deal what she's getting into.
The next phase of our project is to do training for vendors, including support and employment vendors who, really are in a key position, because oftentimes when people are in the workforce, there are opportunities both at work and after work to go out for some drinks or for some drugs, and you're meeting people who have money, and there could be a heightened risk for clients who are in support and employment. So we're going to be training vendors. Anything else about Melanie? Okay. So Antonio, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult. What are you going to do with Antonio?
Get to Phil this time.
I don't remember what we talked about.
Some strategies.
Strategies? Oh, we talked about like all our own clients, I think, more than we talked about these guys, so sorry.
Tell us about
That's the idea.
Yeah, we talked about a care home for this guy, and wait, am I addressing number one still, or number two?
Sure.
I don't remember what we said, guys.
Is it ILS, maybe, for
I mean, those are like, I think, service options. I think we ran into that same problem as you said. We just felt like, what service do we throw at this person? And I think it's hard not to do that. And immediately thought of a care home and kind of just getting maybe this guy outside of just that immediate family, which I think it becomes, a lot of times in my experience, hard for families to support their child. And they're dealing with something, they're dealing with a lot of issues. And so it becomes hard to not enable families. But for me, and aside from that, I think one of the things that keeps popping up in my mind from the very get-go, I feel like I have a hard time getting past this, is just how do you compete? You talk about goals with, what are your goals, Johnny or whatever, and in my particular case with my client, 21 years old, and he's drinking and partying every single day now, and how do you compete with that immediate gratification, like the motivating factor for him? He keeps going out and doing those things.
Well, you try and create discrepancy. If you listen to the people that were in the video, they were drinking and drugging, but they began to experience problems, and somehow were helped to understand that there was a downside to the immediate gratification of using alcohol and drugs. And then they began to incorporate that into, I got here just in time. I don't want to use anymore. I got my family back. All those messages. And it is a long-term prospect. I mean, there's no magic bullet, and the fact that you have so little contact with your clients, you're thinking, well, what's the magic formula? Well, there isn't one.
Yeah.
It's over time. It's concerted, and what we're trying to convey is that how can you kind of move the ball down the field a little bit in your interactions, but also thinking about some of these new services that are coming online, because Antonio would be probably a good candidate for the mentoring program that we're talking about, where he could have a relationship with another person with a developmental disability who's in recovery, who's there to help him. So that maybe on the weekends, that person could be taking him to 12-step meetings rather than him adrift because his family's not around to supervise him.
Will those, you always hear this, the services, will they be available in outlying areas?
And actually, that's exactly what we're going to touch on after we go over this, is the new services that are coming up and how we're looking to expand that to our 10 county catchment areas.
Yes.
So I'll touch on those, the vendorization process in the last couple of minutes. Did you guys have some additional stuff for Antonio? Want to share?
We had pretty much the same.
About the
Using
same?
generic resources such as church. using generic resources such as the church, because it did say he was Mexican American, maybe there's an organization out there that's already in place. Finding somebody that he can hang out with on the weekends, because apparently the family's pretty busy on the weekends, and just to keep him out of the parks, and find other stuff like Access Leisure or something like that that's already in place that is a good thing on the environment, community.
Thank you.
Just quickly, turn to the third page in your little manual. Is the third page in the new one? Let's look at the old one.
It is the screening tool is on page, it discusses it on page 3 and then page 4 and 5.
Okay, so turn to page 3. We looked around at a lot of instruments that could be used to try and screen for alcohol and drug problems with your clients. And kind of the best we could come up with, since there was nothing specifically for persons with developmental disabilities, is what's called the CRAFT. It's used in the alcohol and drug field a lot. It's used a lot with adolescents. And it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty reliable. And we're saying that this is something you should consider using. You could also use this with adolescents if you have in your family or friends. It's really used in a lot of situations. But the first 3 questions are, do you drink any alcohol, more than a few sips? Or alcohol taken at family occasions, religious events? Do you smoke any marijuana? Do you use anything else to get high? If the answers to all 3 of those are no, then you don't go any further. But if you've gotten some positive answers, then you go through the CRAFFT anagram. Is that an anagram? So the C is, have you ever ridden in a car driven by someone, including yourself, who was high or had been using alcohol or drugs? R, do you ever use alcohol or drugs to relax, feel better about yourself, or fit in? A, do you ever use alcohol or drugs while you are alone or by yourself? F, do you ever forget things you did while using alcohol or drugs? And we talked about the blackouts earlier. The second F, do your friends or family ever tell you that you should cut down on your drinking or drug use? And T, have you ever gotten into trouble while you were using alcohol and drugs? Now, I want to ask you to not consider giving this to your spouse when you get home tonight, or that friend of yours who you've been thinking about, but you could. So each yes response score in the second part of the part B scores 1 point. So any 2 affirmative answers or higher is a positive screen indicating that additional information, additional exploration is warranted, and that there may be fire where the smoke is. And there's a little bit on the back, the next page and the next 2 pages about how the craft works in the screening interview and some of the reliability information behind it. So.
The idea here is that you're not going to become experts on screening individuals for drug and alcohol use. What it is that these are not overly obtrusive questions. These are not something that is beyond the realm of what you do as a regional center service coordinator. And so, because this substance use can have such a huge impact on people's ability to be able to access services, whether it's children or adults or whatever else, it is important though that you have the ability to have the discussion. And then you have some familiarity with the different type of services that are available for folks. We want to refer individuals in the different counties to their local alcohol and drug. It is a generic resource that we need to access. In your resource guides is a list of all of the different resources for both alcohol and drugs and mental health, and so obviously you can reference those. Additionally, like I mentioned before, I'm just going to touch on real quickly as we finish up, we are in the process of vendorizing some individuals to provide outpatient treatment for us. The John and John Show have gone all over our catchment area conducting these trainings for folks, and people, as the result, at the end of the trainings, they say, you know what, I think I would like to develop a contract with the regional center. I think that we can change our curriculum in such a manner that we can serve your clients specifically. And so that's been great. We've had, again, the ones that we're in the process of right now are in the Sacramento County area, and that's just by the nature of us being in a large urban area with a lot of different services that we have, more interest there. But we are going to be continuing to seek out services. I know when we were up in Tahoe, one of the people that runs the Tahoe Youth and Family Services one of the people there used to be one of our vendors, was a behavioral vendor of ours for kids with autism. And so being able to have that experience both with the drug and alcohol and then working with our particular population is very beneficial. And so they would be someone that would be a prime person to be a vendor to work with our clients. We're in the process right now. What's going to come out of this is that these folks are going to get vendorized. We're going to put together a sheet that's basically going to show where these facilities are located at, what their specialties are, and then how you're going to go about staffing it so that you can make the purchase. The reason why we're going to be looking at staffing these things is because we want to make sure that you guys do utilize the generic resources, Medi-Cal funding for drug and alcohol treatment. But if we do feel that we need to do a specialized service, then we can go ahead and utilize it through our committees. And so that's going to be forthcoming. Hopefully this will all be finished up before the end of this fiscal year so that we have these resources online. Sending people up to Yuba City to Pathways is not the best option for some of us. We like to be able to have, you know, local services for people if at all possible. So look forward to that. Additionally, this all is going to be put, I don't know if we've discussed this yet, but this is going to be on Policy Tech, all of this documentation, and I don't think we're going to be making any more updates to it right now. It's pretty comprehensive, but you know, people change, agencies close down, so I think over the years we'll probably just periodically do it. And this is just something that you can keep at your desk, flip through it, you know, and if you have any issues with clients that have substance abuse issues, please talk to your supervisor. They should be able to assist you, but then you can always contact the forensics unit. You can always contact me, John Decker, if you have any questions about it, okay?
You have a question?
Yeah, I would just, when you talked about the funding piece, does Medi-Cal, I guess the discrepancy of, you mentioned a lot of times when people are in, you know, some kind of program, their support system becomes like the people who are in that group. And with the particular client of mine that I have, he's borderline, and so he falls in the gap. And so it seems like anyways, like one of his big things is when he's drinking, when he's partying, he's just one of the guys. But then you take that away, then he starts to like not really fit in with that group anymore. And so if you take him out of that and you put him with another group, he starts to not fit in with them anymore. So once he becomes sober, that starts to not really work for him. So having it specifically for people with a developmental disability really is key. And I just started thinking, so if Medi-Cal becomes a generic resource, we have to exhaust that first. Then we're not going to fund a program.
So to explain the most likely service that you'll be utilizing is Strategies for Change. How it will work is that Medi-Cal will be funding 10 sessions, for example. Alta is going to fund 4 more sessions and a home visit. So basically you're going to get enhanced services. It's still going to be the Medi-Cal funded service, because right now they're like Strategies for Change is currently offering drug and alcohol treatment for our clients that are in the community, for clients with developmental disabilities. It's only Medi-Cal funded though. So through our vendorization, we're going to be able to pay for more sessions and a home visit to follow up, because we think it's important to be able to see how things are generalized in people's homes. And then also for those individuals that for some reason aren't eligible for benefits, like for example, those people that have just come out of prison or long stints in jail, and we think that we want to set it up but they have no benefits, we can look at just paying for that directly for them. And so,
you get 14 sessions?
Well, and I think we haven't exactly decided how many sessions it's going to end up being, but it's going to be upwards of, I think it's 10 right now, 10 or 12 that is covered, and then we're going to pay for more sessions as indicated by the vendor. So we're finishing up the vendorization with it, and it'll all be laid out in their program.
And if during that process the person gets integrated into the 12-step community, then that's ongoing. That's free for life. It's always there. And that's really, I think, ought to be a major goal for the Strategies for Change treatments to get them connected.
Yep.
Is this going to be a staffing by a separate committee, or is it going to be added to the mental health committee?
More than likely it'll be through the forensic review team or through the mental health committee. Right now that's the 2 identified. But as you may be aware, we are changing how we're doing our staffing for services now, and we're trying to give more abilities to the supervisors to authorize services. And so the service coordinators will receive all the information about it before we actually put it in place. But right now they're still in the vendorization process. So hopefully by the end of the fiscal year, which would be June 30th, we'll be able to have some more services in place.
So don't forget your evaluations. Patty's in the back here waiting to collect them. Thank you for your time. It's 11:30.
Yeah, thank you very much. Please feel free to contact me if you guys have any questions about any of this material.